Her wrists were raw and bleeding where the rope bit into her skin. Lily Hart was 19 years old, and she was hanging from the ceiling of the Red Canyon Saloon, like a piece of meat left out in the summer heat, her toes barely grazing the sawdust floor. Her arms stretched so far above her head that every breath was its own small agony. The men below her laughed. They raised their glasses, and not one soul in that packed, smoky room moved to help her. Not one. If this story moves you, please subscribe to our channel and follow Lily's journey all the way to the end, and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. The rope had been up there since sundown. Lily knew because she had watched Chet Dillard throw it over the main ceiling beam herself. Watched him test its weight with a slow, deliberate pull. And she had thought, in that strange, calm place the mind goes when fear gets too large to feel that he had done this before. The knot was too clean. The distance from the beam to the floor, too precisely calculated. Just enough slack to keep her standing on her toes if she fought for it. Not enough to ever let her rest. Victor Kane had not even looked at her when he gave the order. That was the part that stayed with her. Not the rope, not the laughter, not the sound of boots scraping across the floorboards as men rearranged themselves to get a better view. It was the fact that Kane had simply lifted 2 fingers from his whiskey glass, barely a gesture, barely anything at all, and Chet had known exactly what to do. That was how long this had been going on. Long enough that the cruelty had its own language. Long enough that no one needed to speak it out loud. "You brought this on yourself, girl," Chet had said, cinching the final knot above her wrists. His breath was sour with tobacco and cheap rye. "Mr. Kane gave you every chance." Lily had not answered him. She had learned in the 14 months since her father's death had left her alone and without a single coin to her name that answering men like Chet Dillard only gave them something to work with. Better to give them nothing. Better to go somewhere inside yourself where they couldn't follow. Her father had taught her that. Thomas Hart, who had run the dry goods store on the south end of Red Rock Flats for 11 years, who had read to her every night from whatever book he could get his hands on, who had believed with the particular stubbornness of a man who had survived the war and come out the other side that the world was still capable of fairness if you just refused to stop looking for it. Thomas Hart had been wrong about Victor Kane. Most people in Red Rock Flats were wrong about Victor Kane right up until the moment they weren't. Kane owned the saloon. He owned the livery and the mill and the 2 largest cattle operations in the county. He owned the sheriff, a soft-bellied man named Pruitt, who had not made an independent decision in 4 years. He owned the judge, or rather the judge owed him, which amounted to the same thing. What he did not own, in any formal documented sense, was Lily Hart. But he had made it abundantly clear in the months since her father's death that he intended to correct that oversight. The debt was the mechanism. It was always the debt. Thomas Hart had borrowed money from Kane's bank 11 years ago to buy his store's initial stock. He had paid it back. Lily had seen the ledger, had run her fingers over her father's careful, cramped handwriting, had done the arithmetic herself 3 times over. The debt was settled, had been settled for nearly a decade. But the original promissory note had gone missing from the bank's records somewhere between Thomas Hart's death and the afternoon Kane's man Dillard showed up at the store with a piece of paper claiming otherwise. Lily had argued. She had fought. She had gone to Sheriff Pruitt with her father's ledger, and Pruitt had looked at it with the particular expression of a man who has already decided which way a conversation is going to end. And then he had handed it back to her and told her that banks kept their own records, and her father's personal papers weren't worth much against a signed legal instrument. She had tried to leave Red Rock Flats after that. Twice. Both times Kane's men had been waiting at the road out of town, not touching her, not threatening her, not in any way she could name or prove. Just there. Just watching. Just making it perfectly clear that leaving was not something she was going to be allowed to do. And so she had stayed, and Kane had offered her work at the saloon. And she had taken it because the alternative was starving. And for 8 months she had served drinks and endured the comments and kept her head down and held on to the number in her father's ledger like a lifeline, $17.40 paid in full, April 1861, because it was the one true thing she had left. Tonight she had said it out loud again. That was her mistake. Not a stranger's mistake. Her mistake. She knew it even now, even hanging here with her arms screaming and the blood running back from her hands in cold, prickling waves. Kane had been holding court at the big table in the back corner. 4 men from the county land office. A railroad man in a wool suit, whiskey going around. And she had been refilling glasses like she was supposed to, invisible. Like she was supposed to be. And then Kane had said loud enough for the table to hear that the Heart Girl was costing him more in patience than she was worth. And that it might be time to formalize arrangements. Formalize arrangements. She still wasn't entirely sure what that meant. She had a few guesses, none of them good. What she did know was that something in her had simply reached its end. 14 months of silence and smallness and survival, and she had set down the whiskey bottle on the table in front of Victor Kane and said, "My father's debt was paid in full. You know it, and I know it, and the ledger proves it, and I am done pretending otherwise." The table had gone very quiet. Kane had looked at her for a long moment, with those flat, colorless eyes of his, the eyes of a man who had stopped seeing other people as people somewhere along the way, and had never found a reason to start again. And then he had lifted those 2 fingers from his glass, and Chet Dillard had materialized out of the cigarette smoke like he'd been waiting there all along. Which Lily supposed he had been. That had been 2 hours ago, maybe 3. Time moved strangely when your arms were above your head and every breath was a negotiation. The saloon had filled up since then, it always did on Friday nights, and the men who came in found her there, and some of them looked away, and some of them didn't bother. A few made comments she refused to hear. The piano player in the corner had kept right on playing, because what else was he going to do? And the bartender, old Heck Granger, had kept on serving, because Heck Granger had a wife and 2 kids, and Victor Kane owned the roof over all their heads. Lily understood. She did not forgive, but she understood. What she could not understand, what she had never been able to understand, no matter how many times she had watched it happen in this town, was how a room full of people could look at something wrong, happening right in front of them, and find so many ways to make it someone else's problem. She had stopped counting the faces a long time ago. She focused instead on the ceiling beam above her wrists, on the grain of the wood, on the particular pattern of lamplight and shadow moving across it as the smoke shifted, on breathing, just breathing, in and out, one more after that. Her father's voice in her head reading to her from a battered copy of Psalms he'd carried since the war. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. She was in the valley. She knew that much. She just hadn't found her way out yet. The saloon doors swung open at 20 minutes past 9. Lily did not look up immediately. Men came and went all night. The doors were always moving. But something about this particular opening was different. Something in the quality of the silence that followed it. A brief collective pause in the noise of the room like a held breath, and she raised her eyes despite herself. He was not a large man. That was the first thing she noticed, because she had been expecting large. Kane's men were all large, deliberately so chosen for the particular usefulness of their size. This man was lean, with the kind of economy of movement that came not from smallness, but from absolute certainty about where every part of his body was at all times. He wore a dark brown vest over a shirt that had been washed so many times it had gone the color of old bone. The hat was pulled low. The gun at his hip was worn easy, the way a man carries something he has carried so long it has stopped feeling like a weapon and started feeling like a hand. He stood in the doorway for a moment, taking in the room. Lily watched his eyes move, watched them find the bar, the tables, the crowd, and then find her. Stop. She had been stared at all night. She was accustomed to the weight of being looked at. But this was not staring. This was something else. This was the look of a man who had just registered a fact and was already quietly deciding what to do about it. He walked to the bar, settled onto a stool, said something to Heck Granger that she couldn't hear over the piano, and Heck poured him a glass of something amber without meeting his eyes. The man did not drink it right away. He set it on the bar in front of him, and he sat very still, and Lily had the strange and irrational sensation that the room's temperature had dropped a degree or two, not from cold, but from the presence of something that cut through heat. That's Cole Maddox. she heard someone near her murmur. Two men at a table just below where she hung to, caught up in their own quiet conversation to remember she could hear them. Heard he was up in Carson County last fall, something about a land dispute that went bad. How bad? 3 men dead bad. Kane's men. The other man was quiet for a moment. And he just walked in here. Looks like. Lily looked at Cole Maddox. He was still not drinking his whiskey. He was watching the room in that careful, unhurried way of his. And she realized that he was not watching all of it. He was watching one specific part of it. The part where Chet Dillard stood with 2 of Kane's other men near the far wall, laughing about something, not paying attention to the door, because men like Chet Dillard never needed to pay attention to the door. Nothing ever came through the door that frightened them. Or almost nothing. Victor Kane appeared from the back room, then moving through the crowd with the practiced ease of a man who has never had to push past people because people always moved for him. He was tall and silver-haired, and impeccably dressed for a frontier town, and there was something almost courtly about him that Lily had once briefly and shamefully found impressive before she understood what was underneath it. He saw Cole Maddox immediately. His face did not change, but something behind it did a slight tightening, a recalibration, like a man adjusting his grip on something slippery. He walked to the bar, stood beside Cole. "Mr. Maddox," Kane said, his voice carrying that particular warmth that Lily had learned to recognize as entirely weaponized. "Been a while." Cole turned his glass once on the bar, did not look up. "Kane, didn't expect to see you in Red Rock Flats." "Passing through." "Of course." Kane let his eyes drift upward toward Lily with the casual ownership of a man surveying his property. "I hope the accommodations of our humble establishment aren't too distracting." Cole followed his gaze, looked at Lily for a moment, looked back at his glass. "Seems like a lot of trouble for a Friday night." "Discipline," Kane said pleasantly, "is its own kind of order. The girl had some things to learn about the nature of obligations." Cole finally picked up his glass, turned it. "What she owe you?" Kane smiled. It was a careful smile, the kind that contained information rather than emotion. "More than she can pay." "That so?" "It is." Cole drank. Set the glass down. And then he said, without raising his voice, without changing his tone in any perceptible way, "How long she been up there?" Kane blinked. Just once, an almost imperceptible fracture in the pleasantness. "That's not really your concern, Mr. Maddox." "No," Cole agreed. "I reckon it ain't." He looked at his glass. "Just asking." Lily's arms had gone beyond pain into a kind of white, buzzing absence that she knew from the 2 previous times Kane had done this to someone was not a good sign. Her fingers were swelling. She could feel it, even though she could no longer feel her fingers. Below her in the shifting crowd, she watched Cole Maddox sit very still at the bar, with his untouched second glass of whiskey, and she thought with the strange, detached clarity of someone who has been frightened past the point of fear he knows it isn't right. "He can see it. I can tell he can see it." And then Kane leaned close to Cole and said something in a low voice that Lily couldn't hear, and 2 of his men drifted away from the far wall and began moving through the crowd in Cole's direction, and Lily thought, it doesn't matter. No one is going to help. No one ever helps. Cole stood up. The movement was so quiet, so unhurried, that half the room didn't register it until it was already done. He simply unfolded from the bar stool and was standing, and when he turned around, his back was to the bar, and his eyes were on Chet Dillard and the rope above Lily's wrists, and his right hand was resting at his side in a way that was not quite reaching for anything, but was not quite not reaching either. The room understood before anyone spoke. The piano stopped. It just stopped. The player lifted his hands off the keys, and the silence that fell had weight to it. The kind of silence that comes not from the absence of sound, but from every person in a room choosing not to make any. Cole's voice was not loud. It was the opposite of loud. It was the kind of voice that in a truly quiet room you could hear in your back teeth. "Let her down," he said. Chet Dillard looked at him, looked at Kane. Kane's jaw was tight, and his pleasant expression had been replaced by something colder and more honest. And for a moment, nothing happened. One of those moments that last 3 seconds and feel like 10 minutes while the world waits to find out who it's going to be. "Boy," Kane said with infinite measured contempt, "you do not know what you are walking into." "Let her down," Cole said again. Same tone, same volume, as if the first time simply hadn't been heard. Lily felt the rope go slack before she understood what was happening. Someone, Chet, or one of the others she didn't see, who had moved to the far beam where the rope was tied off and was unwinding it, and suddenly she was dropping, and her legs, which had been holding what little weight they could manage for hours, folded completely. She hit the floor on her knees. The impact should have hurt. She wasn't sure it did. She wasn't sure she could tell anymore what hurt and what didn't. Her wrists were still bound, her arms still stretched above her from the habit of it, and then there were hands. Different hands, careful, hands lifting her from the floor, and someone was cutting the rope from her wrists with a knife she never saw drawn, and a voice was saying very quietly close to her ear, "Easy. I got you. You're all right." She looked up at Cole Maddox's face from 2 inches away, and thought in the strange, swimming way of a person who has not quite arrived back in their own body. Yet his eyes are dark, like my father's were. "Can you stand?" he asked. She considered the question seriously. It deserved a serious answer. "Not yet," she said. "All right." He didn't seem troubled by this. He kept one hand braced at her back and turned to face the room, Kane Dillard, the dozen men watching from various degrees of distance, and his expression was entirely perfectly calm. "She's done here for the night," he said. "Anyone takes issue with that, they can talk to me." Victor Kane had gone very still in the way of powerful men who are recalculating, which was, in its own way, far more frightening than rage. His eyes moved between Cole and Lily with the careful precision of a man building a plan he would not speak out loud. "You're making an enemy, Maddox," he said. Cole looked at him steadily. "Had worse." And then, without another word, he helped Lily Hart off the floor of the Red Canyon Saloon, one arm around her waist, her ruined wrists cradled against her chest, both of them moving through a crowd that parted without being asked, and walked her out into the cold night air of Red Rock Flats. Behind them, the piano did not start again. Not for a long time. Lily stood in the dark street outside the saloon, breathing. Just breathing. The air was cold and tasted of pine smoke and horse dust and the faint mineral sharpness of the creek 2 blocks east, and she breathed it in and breathed it out and felt her legs decide slowly and reluctantly to hold her. Cole Maddox stood a few feet away, watching the saloon doors, not saying anything, not hurrying her. "You didn't have to do that," she said finally. "No," he agreed. "He's going to come after you." "Probably." She looked at him. In the lamplight from the saloon windows, she could see the dust on his hat and the hard, quiet set of his jaw, and the way he stood with his weight even on both feet, like a man who has learned not to lean anywhere. "Who are you?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Man who was passing through." "Were you?" she said. "Passing through." He glanced at her, then briefly, and something moved in his face that she couldn't quite read, not softness exactly, but its nearest neighbor. "Was," he said. "Reckon I ain't anymore." Lily Hart held her wounded wrists against her chest in the cold, dark street of a town that had failed her over and over again. And she looked at this stranger who had walked into a room full of violence and said, "Let her down," with the same tone you might use to ask for the time. And she thought, something is different now. She didn't know yet what it meant. She didn't know yet what it was going to cost either of them. She only knew that for the first time in 14 months, the night air felt like something other than a trap. And somewhere inside the Red Canyon Saloon, Victor Kane was already planning. Cole Maddox did not sleep that night. Lily knew this because she did not sleep either, and the room he had taken at Mabel Greer's boarding house was directly across the narrow hallway from the one Mabel had given her out of pity, or out of the particular stubbornness of a woman who had watched Victor Kane run this town for 20 years and was tired of it, or both. Lily lay on the narrow bed with her wrists wrapped in strips of muslin that Mabel had dampened with witch hazel, and she stared at the ceiling, and twice in the night she heard Cole's floorboards creak as he moved to the window and stood there, and she knew without asking that he was watching the street. She appreciated that. She did not say so. There was a particular kind of gratitude that had no comfortable shape yet that needed time to find its form. In the morning, her wrists had gone purple-yellow at the edges of the rope marks, and her shoulders ached with a deep grinding persistence that she suspected would take weeks to fade. She dressed carefully, which took longer than it should have, and when she came out into the hallway, Cole was already there, leaning against the wall with his hat in his hands, looking at the floor with the focused patience of a man who has learned to wait without fidgeting. He looked up when her door opened. "How bad?" he asked. "I've had worse mornings," she said, which was not entirely true, but was not entirely a lie either, and he seemed to understand the distinction because he just nodded and pushed off the wall. They went downstairs to Mabel's kitchen, where Mabel put coffee in front of both of them without being asked, and then found reasons to stay near the stove, which meant she was listening, which both of them knew and neither of them minded, because Mabel Greer had kept more secrets in this town than the church had kept prayers. "Kane's men were outside before dawn," Cole said. He wrapped both hands around his cup. "Two of them, just watching." Lily absorbed this. "He's not going to let it go." "No, he's not." "Then you should leave." She said it plainly without drama, because it was the true thing, and she had learned that the true things were better said plainly. "You came in, you helped me, that was—" She stopped, recalibrated. "That was more than anyone in this town has done in 14 months. But if you stay, he'll make you part of this. And it isn't your fight." Cole looked at her for a long moment over his coffee cup. "Where are you going to go?" She opened her mouth, closed it. The question was more honest than she'd expected. "I don't know yet," she admitted. "He's got men on both roads out of town. I saw them last night on the way in." "I know." She looked at her cup. "He's had them there for months." Something shifted in Cole's expression at that, not surprise exactly, but the particular quality of attention a man gives when a thing he suspected turns out to be worse than he thought. "Months," he repeated, "since my father died." She kept her voice level. It required some effort. "He let me think I could leave. He just never let me actually do it." Cole was quiet for a moment. Then, "Tell me about the debt." So she told him. All of it. The ledger, the promissory note, the conversation with Sheriff Pruitt, the forgery she was almost certain of, but could not prove. She told it in the careful, organized way her father had taught her to think, without embellishment, just the facts in their proper sequence, and Cole listened without interrupting, which was rarer than it should have been, and which she noticed. When she finished, he said, "You still have the ledger. Hidden. Not at the saloon." She paused. "My father's store. There's a false bottom in the back counter. Kane's men went through the store after he died, but they didn't find it. Because they didn't know to look. Because they thought they'd already won," she said. "Men like that stop looking once they think it's over." Cole almost smiled. It was barely a thing, a slight change at the corner of his mouth, but she caught it. "That's useful," he said. "I know." Mabel chose that moment to set a plate of biscuits on the table between them, refill both their cups, and say without looking at either of them, "Victor Kane came by here an hour before you two came down. Said he wanted to make sure I understood that harboring troublemakers was a fast way to lose a business license in this county." Cole looked at Mabel. "What did you tell him?" Mabel picked up her coffee pot and turned back to the stove. "Told him I'd think about it," she said. "And then I put the good lock on your doors." Lily felt something shift in her chest, that particular painful warmth of unexpected kindness, which after long enough without it, almost felt like its own kind of hurt. She looked at Mabel's back and said, "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to," Mabel said, not turning around. "That's generally the point of doing something." They were still sitting at the table when the knock came at the front door. Not a polite knock. The kind of knock that is not really asking. Cole was on his feet before the second knock landed. He moved to the side of the kitchen doorway, out of the sightline from the front hall, and looked at Lily with an expression that said, "Stay there," and said it without a word. Mabel went to the door with the coffee pot still in her hand, which Lily recognized as the particular genius of a woman who understood that carrying something domestic made you look less like a threat. She heard the door open, heard a voice she recognized, Chet Dillard, with his sour tobacco warmth and his particular way of making courtesy sound like its opposite. "Morning, Mabel. Mr. Kane's asking after his property." "His property," Mabel repeated with the flat, polite incomprehension of a woman who is being entirely comprehensible. "The girl, Hart girl." "Well," Mabel said, "I rent rooms, Chet. I don't keep inventory." A pause. "She's here. We know she's here." "Then you know more than I do." A beat. "Was there something else?" "Only I've got biscuits on." Another pause longer. Lily in the kitchen did not breathe. "Kane's going to want an answer," Dillard said. "About last night. About Maddox." "I imagine he will," Mabel said serenely. "You have a good morning, Chet." The door closed. Lily released a breath she had been holding since the first knock, and Cole came back into the kitchen and sat down, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Then Cole said, "We need the ledger." "I know." "Today, before he decides to look harder." Lily thought about the store, the empty shelves, the smell of dust and old wood, the counter where her father had stood for 11 years, totaling figures in his careful hand. She had not been back since the week after his funeral, when she had understood that Kane was not going to let her grieve in peace. "I can get in through the back," she said. "There's a door that doesn't latch right. Kane's men don't know about it." "They might now." "Might," she agreed. "But might is different from do." He looked at her. That almost smile again, quicker this time. "All right," he said. "We go tonight." The day between that morning and that night was the longest Lily Hart had experienced since the day of her father's burial, and that was saying something. She stayed in her room mostly at Cole's suggestion, not because she was hiding, she was done with hiding, but because being visible gave Kane's men information she preferred they not have. Cole moved around the town. She didn't ask him where he went. He was the kind of man who moved purposefully, and she had already learned enough about him to know that purposeful movement was not random. He came back at 2 in the afternoon with news that settled into her stomach like cold water. "Kane filed papers this morning," he said. He sat in the chair by her window without being invited, which she found she didn't mind. "At Pruitt's office. Formal claim on the Hart store and all its contents." Her hands went still in her lap. "He can't. The store isn't part of any debt agreement. It was never. He's using a different instrument. Claims your father signed over a lien on the property in 1864. Secondary documents separate from the promissory note." Lily stared at him. "My father never signed any such thing." "I know. That's a forgery. That is absolutely—" She stopped, breathed, started again. "He's accelerating. Why is he accelerating? He's been patient for 14 months, and now he's moving in a single day. Why?" And then she heard it in her own words and understood. "Because of you," she said. Cole nodded. "Because of me. I changed the calculation. Before last night he had time. Now he thinks someone might be paying attention. So he's trying to establish legal control of everything before anyone can look too closely. That's my read." Lily was quiet for a moment, turning the shape of it over in her mind. Her father had taught her accounts, had taught her to follow the logic of numbers of transactions of where money moved and why, because money, he always said, told the truth, even when people didn't. She was applying that same logic now to a different kind of ledger. Kane's moves, the sequence of them, the what comes next. "If he gets legal control of the store," she said slowly, "he can remove everything in it, legally, with Pruitt's blessing." "Yes." "Then we don't have until tonight." She was already standing. "We have until whenever he sends men over there, which could be this afternoon." Cole stood. "Then let's not wait for tonight." The back door of the Hart General Store had a latch that had been broken since 1869, when a wind from the north had caught it wrong and bent the catch just enough to make it unreliable. Thomas Hart had meant to fix it every autumn for 7 years, and had never quite gotten around to it, and Lily had never been more grateful for her father's particular talent for postponing small repairs. The store was cold and dim, and smelled of sawdust and the ghost of peppermint candy. Lily moved through it without lighting a lamp, navigating by memory, by the precise internal map of a childhood spent running between these shelves. She heard Cole's footsteps behind her, careful and quiet, and she was grateful for those too, for the particular quality of his presence, which was watchful without being crowding close, without being suffocating. She reached the back counter and crouched behind it, feeling along the underside with fingers that were still sore and swollen from the rope. The false bottom was a panel her father had installed. Himself a simple thing, just a piece of oak fitted into a channel, but fitted so precisely that you had to know exactly where to press. She pressed. The panel swung inward. Inside the ledger, wrapped in oilcloth. 3 other documents her father had apparently thought worth hiding, she didn't know what they were yet. And a small envelope with her name on it, in her father's handwriting. She had not known about the envelope. Her hands went entirely still. "Lily." Cole's voice low and urgent from near the back door. "Someone's coming, front of the building. 2 men." She shoved everything into the front of her dress, pressed the panel back into place, and stood. They went out the broken back door at a pace that was not quite running, but was its fastest neighbor, and they were half a block away and into the alley behind the livery before she heard the front door of her father's store bang open. She did not look back. She kept moving. Cole's hand found her elbow in the dark of the alley, not grabbing, just steadying, and guided her left away from the main street, through a gap between buildings she would never have found on her own. And she thought briefly and helplessly that this man moved through Red Rock Flats like he had already memorized an escape route that the town didn't know it had. They stopped in the shadow of the old mill wheel, stopped and listened, and the distant sound of men's voices from the direction of the store faded without coming closer. Lily put her back against the mill wall and breathed. The ledger and the papers and the envelope were pressed against her ribs. She could feel the sharp corner of the envelope with every inhale. Her father's handwriting on the front of it. Her name. "You all right?" Cole asked. "I got it," she said. "I got all of it." He looked at the front of her dress where the bulk of the oilcloth was visible. "What else was in there?" "Documents I haven't seen before. And," she paused, "a letter from my father, with my name on it." Cole watched her face for a moment with that quiet reading attention of his. "Do you want to open it now?" She thought about her father. About the particular precision with which he had hidden these things, the care of it, the deliberateness. He had known something. He had known that there might come a day when she would need what he had put in that hidden place, and he had prepared for it, and he had not told her because she thought, because he had not wanted her to be afraid before she needed to be. "Not here," she said. "Somewhere safe." "Mabel's," he said. "Back way." They moved through the alleys of Red Rock Flats, like people who had given up on the streets entirely, which Lily supposed they had. The town felt different to her now, not smaller exactly, but more legible. She could see its architecture of fear and dependency more clearly now that she was outside the structure of it, now that she had Cole Maddox moving at her shoulder like a man who operated by a different set of rules than the ones Kane had written. They were almost to Mabel's back fence when Cole stopped. Lily stopped with him, looked at his face. He was looking at something ahead, a figure she realized, a single figure standing at Mabel's back gate with the particular stillness of someone who has been told to wait there and has been waiting longer than they expected. Not one of Kane's men. Too young, too uncertain in the shoulders. The figure turned, and Lily recognized Billy Pruitt, the sheriff's boy, 17 years old, who swept out the jail on Saturdays, and had once, when Lily was still working at the saloon, slipped her a piece of paper with a single word on it, "Careful." She had never acknowledged it. She had never forgotten it. Billy Pruitt saw them, and his whole body exhaled with relief. He stepped forward quickly, glancing behind him, and when he spoke fast and low. "Miss Hart, I've been looking for you for an hour." He glanced at Cole, then back to Lily. "My father sent me." Lily felt something cold move through her. Your father. He... Billy stopped. Swallowed. Something complicated moved through his young face. He wants you to know that Kane's new filings, the ones from this morning, there's a witness listed on the 1864 lien document. Man named Gerald Cook, supposed to have witnessed your father's signature. I know that name, Lily said slowly. He was the bank clerk. He left Red Rock Flats in 1865, Billy said. He died in 1865. Cholera up in Laramie. He held her gaze. So whoever signed as Gerald Cook on that document signed a dead man's name. The silence that followed had a particular texture. Lily felt it in her chest, felt the shape of what it meant, not just a forged debt, not just a missing promissory note, but a document signed by a man who had been dead for 9 years. Which meant Victor Kane, or someone working for Victor Kane, had manufactured evidence so completely that they had not even checked whether their witness was still alive. Which meant they were not careful. Which meant they could be proven careless. Cole said beside her, very quietly. Does your father know you're telling us this? Billy looked at the ground, then up. He knows I left the jail, he said. He didn't ask me where I was going. A pause. He's not a bad man. He's been scared for a long time. I know, Lily said. And she did. The particular architecture of a town like this required people like Pruitt, not villains, just frightened people who had made small accommodations to fear until the accommodations had become a kind of cage. She understood it. She had been in her own version of that cage. There's something else, Billy said. He reached inside his coat and produced a folded paper. Kane's sending a man to the telegraph office tonight, filing a request for a federal warrant against Maddox. He handed the paper to Cole. Interference with lawful property seizure. That's what they're calling it. Cole took the paper, looked at it. His expression did not change, but Lily watched his jaw tighten once briefly, and then release. How long before the warrant goes through? Day and a half, maybe 2 days if the line's busy? Cole folded the paper, put it in his vest pocket. Thank you, he said to Billy, and there was something genuine and direct in it that made the boy's shoulders settle. Billy nodded, looked at Lily one more time. I'm sorry, he said. For all of it. For all the times nobody... He stopped. I'm sorry, Miss Hart. I know, she said again. Go home, Billy. He went. Lily stood at Mabel's back gate with the ledger pressed against her ribs and her father's letter sharp at her side and the name Gerald Cook ringing in her head like a bell that had just been struck. And she looked at Cole Maddox and he looked back at her and she said, We need to get to Mill Haven. Yes, he said. That's 3 days' ride. Yes. Kane's men are on both roads. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. Then, there's a third way. Older road, north through the canyon, longer, harder, but Kane won't have men there because nobody uses it. Why doesn't anybody use it? Because it's longer and harder, he said. And again that almost smile. Despite herself, despite everything, the rope marks on her wrists, and the letter from her dead father, and the federal warrant being filed against the only person who had helped her, Lily Hart almost smiled back. We leave at first light, she asked. Before first light, he said. Soon as it's dark enough that the men on the road can't see which direction we went. She nodded, put her hand on the gate latch, then stopped and said without turning, Why are you doing this truly? You could ride out of here. They can't stop you. You're not the one with a debt on paper. You could just go. He was quiet for long enough that she turned to look at him. I could, he said. He was looking at something above the roofline at the sky going the dark purple of early evening. Walked away from things before. Easier than staying usually. He brought his eyes down to her face. This one's different. Why? He considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. Because you said the debt was paid, he said. And I believe you. And I don't like what happens to a place where that stops meaning anything. Lily looked at him for a moment. All right, she said. She went inside to open her father's letter. The letter was 3 pages long. Lily sat at Mabel's kitchen table with the oil lamp pulled close and read it twice before she trusted herself to speak. Her father's handwriting, that careful cramped script she had known since before she could read anything at all, covered both sides of each page with the particular density of a man who had a great deal to say and was not certain he would get another chance to say it. Cole sat across from her. He did not ask. He waited with the patience she was beginning to understand was not a performance, but simply the way he was built. A man who had learned somewhere along the way that silence was often more useful than sound. Mabel had gone upstairs. The house was quiet. Outside, the wind had picked up, which was good. It covered sound, both theirs and anyone else's. When Lily finally looked up, her eyes were dry. She had made a decision somewhere in the middle of the second reading that she was not going to cry tonight. There would be time for that later. Tonight was for thinking. He knew, she said. Cole looked at her steadily. About Kane. About all of it. She pressed her palm flat against the first page, steadying it, steadying herself. He started keeping records 2 years before he died. Not just his own ledger, he kept copies of other people's transactions too. Anyone who came to him saying Kane had changed the terms of a debt, or moved a boundary line, or forged a document, he wrote it all down. She paused. Names, dates, amounts, 17 families Cole. 17 families in this county that Kane has done this to. Cole was very still. Where are the records? That's the thing. She looked at the third page. He didn't keep them here. He says, she read it again to make sure she had it right. He says he sent copies to a man in Mill Haven, a lawyer, name of Frederick Alden. Alden. Cole said the name as if tasting it for something familiar. You know him. Know of him. He practiced in Carson County before he moved to Mill Haven. He's the one who built the fraud case that sent 3 of Kane's associates to prison in 1871. He paused. And he's the brother of Judge Elias Alden. The weight of that landed on Lily all at once. Her father, careful, methodical, quiet Thomas Hart, who had read to her from Psalms and kept his figures and columns so clean you could run your finger down them, had not simply been recording injustices. He had been building toward something. He had found the right man and sent the evidence to him and then died before he could finish what he started, and he had left the rest of it for her. He knew he was sick, she said. He knew before he told me. He had months that he didn't tell me, and he spent them on this. Cole didn't say anything. There was nothing useful to say. He just looked at her with those dark, steady eyes, and she was grateful again for the particular quality of his silence. There's something else, she said. She pulled the second document from inside the oilcloth, not the ledger, the other one, the one she had not recognized at first. This is a deed to 37 acres north of town, registered in 1868 in my name. Cole's eyes sharpened. In your name. My father transferred the land to me 2 years ago without telling me. 37 acres along the North Creek bed. She looked at him. Cole, that's where Kane has been trying to run the new rail spur. I heard the railroad men talking about it at the Saloon. The only viable route through the canyon runs along that creek. Kane needs that land. And it's yours. It's mine. Legally, properly registered mine. She set the deed flat on the table between them. This is why he filed the forgeries. This is why he invented the debt. He can't buy the land if I don't know I have it, and he can't seize it without first establishing a legal claim over me personally. She heard the logic of it close around her like a completed equation. The debt was never about the store. It was always about the land. Cole looked at the deed for a long moment. Then he looked at her. Your father was a careful man. He was, she said. And this time, she almost didn't keep her voice level. Almost. He was the most careful man I ever knew, and Kane still almost won. Almost, Cole said. And the way he said it, quiet, certain, with the particular firmness of someone who is not making a promise so much as stating a fact, made Lily believe it. They left Mabel's house at 4 a.m. Mabel was awake to see them off, which surprised neither of them. She pressed a bundle of food into Lily's hands and said nothing about it, which was, Lily had come to understand precisely Mabel's way of saying everything. At the back gate, Lily turned and looked at the older woman in the dark and said, "If Kane's men come asking, I'll tell them you left yesterday," Mabel said. "Which I'll believe myself by noon, the rate my memory goes." She paused. "You come back here when it's done. You hear me? You come back." Lily heard her. They moved north through the dark, with Cole leading Lily close behind two horses that Cole had sourced from somewhere she didn't ask about. Bays, sturdy and quiet, with the patient disposition of animals that had covered difficult ground before. The canyon road opened north of town past the old mill, barely a road at all anymore. More a suggestion of one, a gap between rock faces that widened and narrowed according to its own reasoning. It was hard going in the dark. Cole set a pace that was faster than comfortable and slower than reckless, and Lily matched it without complaint because she understood the mathematics of it. Every hour of dark they used was an hour of daylight. They didn't have to spend being visible. They rode in silence for a long time. The wind came through the canyon in long cold gusts that smelled of pine and higher elevation. Lily's wrists ached where the rope had been. She noticed this the way she had been noticing pain for the last 2 days, as information rather than complaint. It was Cole who spoke first, after perhaps an hour of riding. "How much accounting did your father teach you?" he asked. He said it the way a man asks a question he has been holding for a while, not casually, but with the deliberateness of someone who has decided the time is right. "Enough to run the store," she said. "Enough to know when a ledger's been altered. The totals change, but the handwriting pressure changes too. You can see it if you know what to look for. My father showed me." She paused. "Why?" "Because what you're carrying in that oilcloth isn't just evidence of one crime. If your father documented 17 families, and Frederick Alden has copies, then what you have is the foundation of a case that could reach every fraudulent transaction Kane has made in this county for 30 years. He was quiet for a moment. "That's bigger than a local judge. That needs a territorial court. It needs the right lawyer and the right documentation and someone who can read that ledger and explain it to a room full of people who don't know accounting from arithmetic." Lily understood what he was not quite saying. "You mean me. I mean you." She thought about that for a while. The idea of it standing in a courtroom reading her father's figures aloud, explaining the pressure changes in the handwriting, tracing the logic of 17 fraudulent debts, was not frightening in the way it might have been 2 days ago. 2 days ago she had been hanging from a ceiling beam. Courtrooms by comparison had chairs. "All right," she said. "Just all right. What else would you like me to say?" That almost smile. She was learning to watch for it now. It came quickly and left quickly and meant more than it looked like. They stopped to rest the horses just before dawn in a wide place where the canyon walls stepped back and the sky opened above them enough to show the first gray lightning in the east. Cole handed her dried meat and hard biscuit from his saddlebag, and they ate standing, watching their back trail. "Tell me about Carson County," Lily said. He looked at her sideways. "The 3 men," she said. "Kane's associates, the ones that died." He chewed, swallowed. "Not a comfortable story." "I'm not looking for comfortable." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I worked land arbitration for 3 years after the war. Hired by families who were losing ground to bigger operations, same pattern as here, different county. Forged liens manufactured debtsmen on the roads." He stopped, started again. "The 3 men who died weren't killed by me. They were killed when a fraud scheme they were running collapsed, and the men they'd defrauded came for them before I could get them to a court." He looked at the lightening sky. "I've spent a long time thinking about whether it would have gone differently if I'd moved faster, whether those men deserved a trial more than they deserved what they got." "What did you decide?" "That the question doesn't have a clean answer," he said, "but that courts are better than alternatives, generally." Lily absorbed that. The complexity of it, the refusal to resolve it neatly, it was the most she had heard him say at once, and it landed with the particular weight of things that have been carried a long time before, being set down. "My father believed that too," she said. "In courts, in the law when it worked." She paused. He kept those records because he believed someone would eventually listen, even in Red Rock Flats, even after everything Kane built here. He was right, Cole said. He just ran out of time. He passed it to me, she said. The time, the records. He passed it forward. Cole looked at her, then fully not the sideways glance. And something in his face that had been carefully managed rearranged itself just slightly into something less managed, something more honest. He did, he said. And you're going to do something with it. The sound reached them before the sight did, hoofbeats, distant but deliberate, coming from the south end of the canyon. Not one horse. 3, maybe 4. Cole's hand went to her arm. Mount up, he said quietly. Now. They were moving before the hoofbeats became distinguishable. Cole pushed the pace up harder than before, the horses straining on the uneven ground, and Lily rode without thinking about her wrists or her shoulders or the hard edge of the oilcloth against her side. Rode on the pure adrenaline of knowing that whatever she was carrying could not be caught. The canyon narrowed ahead of them. Cole took a left fork that Lily would never have seen on her own, barely a gap really, between 2 rock faces, and they pressed through single file, the horses' flanks almost touching stone on both sides, and came out on a shelf of rock above the main canyon floor. Below them, she could see the riders. 4 men, moving fast. One of them was Chet Dillard. She recognized the set of his shoulders, even from above, even at distance, the way you recognize something you have spent months afraid of. Cole watched them pass below. His face was still. His hand rested on his thigh 3 inches from his gun and stayed there. The riders did not look up. They moved through the canyon below at a hard pace following the main track north, and the sound of them faded and the silence came back. Lily let out a breath. They'll figure out the fork eventually, Cole said. When the track stops going anywhere. He looked at the sky. We have maybe an hour. Then we ride. Then we ride. They came down off the rock shelf on the far side and rejoined the old road where it curved east, and Lily pushed her horse to a canter and held it there, and the cold canyon air came at her face, like something that had been waiting to do exactly that. And for a strange split second, she felt not safe, not free, not anything that simple. She felt forward. Moving forward with purpose, with the deed and the ledger, and her father's letter pressed against her ribs, like the specific weight of something worth carrying. It was Cole who spotted the problem first. He slowed without warning, and Lily pulled up beside him, following his gaze to the road ahead, where it curved around a stand of boulders. A horse stood there, riderless reins trailing. A good horse well saddled with the look of an animal that had been tied and had pulled free. Cole's hand went still. That's not a stray, he said. No, she agreed. Someone left it here intentionally, or someone's horse ran ahead of them. They looked at each other. If it's a trap, she said, riding around those boulders puts us in the open. Yes? And if it's not a trap, then someone's in trouble, he said, and we ride past them. Lily looked at the riderless horse, looked at the boulders, looked at Cole. Go around the long way, she said. Through the brush to the north. Come at the boulders from behind. He looked at her with that reading attention. That's good thinking. I know. They split Cole going north through the brush, Lily holding her position on the road far enough back to run if she needed to close enough to see. She watched the boulders, watched the riderless horse shift its weight. Watched the brush where Cole had gone still, with listening. Then she heard it. A voice low and strained, coming from behind the boulders. Not calling for help, the opposite, trying not to be heard. Cole appeared from the far side of the boulders on foot, his horse tied back in the brush, his hand at his gun. He looked at the ground behind the boulders, then looked up at Lily and made a quick gesture come. She dismounted and came. Behind the boulders, sitting with his back against the rock and his leg extended wrong in front of him, was a man she did not recognize, older, maybe 60, in the clothes of a professional rather than a rider, a wool coat and leather case still strapped across his chest. He had the white-faced look of someone managing serious pain by force of will alone. He looked up at them both. His eyes went to Lily's face, and then to the oilcloth she was carrying, and then something happened in his expression that was not relief exactly, but was its closest neighbor. "Miss Hart," he said. His voice was strained, but clear. "I was hoping you'd take this road." Lily stared at him. "Who are you?" "Frederick Alden," he said. "I've been trying to get to Red Rock Flats for 3 days. Kane's men intercepted me on the main road 2 days ago. I got away, but my horse threw me this morning." He looked at his leg. "I think it's broken." The silence that followed had a specific quality. The quality of a story that has just revealed a piece of itself that changes everything that came before it. Frederick Alden, the lawyer. The man her father had sent the copies to. He had not been waiting for them to come to him. He had been coming to them. "You have the copies," Lily said. "My father's copies of the records." "I have them," Alden said. "And I have something else your father sent me. Something he said to use only if it came to a federal case." He reached inside his coat with the careful movement of a man in significant pain and produced a document that Lily recognized even from 3 feet away. The same cramped, careful handwriting, the same columns, the same precision, but longer. Many more pages. "Your father kept a second set of records," Alden said. "A complete accounting of every transaction Kane ever ran through the county bank. Every one. He had a source inside the bank, I don't know who. He never told me, and this is 30 years of Kane's financial history. All of it. Every forged signature, every manufactured debt, every bribed official, and every stolen acre." Cole crouched beside Alden, looking at the document, and his expression was the calmest Lily had ever seen it, which she was learning was how he looked when things were most serious. "This goes to Judge Elias Alden," Cole said. "My brother," Frederick confirmed. "Yes, he's been waiting for this case for 8 years. He just needed the documentation." He looked at Lily. "Your father promised him it existed. He died before he could deliver it." Lily Hart stood in a cold canyon in the middle of nowhere, with a broken-legged lawyer at her feet, and 30 years of fraud in her hands, and Chet Dillard somewhere behind her, getting closer, and she felt something shift in the center of her chest, with the deliberate, irrevocable quality of a lock turning. Her father had started this. She was going to finish it. "Can you ride?" she asked Alden. He looked at his leg, looked at her. "With help," he said. "Then we're going to help you," she said. "Cole." "Already on it," Cole said, and stood. Getting Frederick Alden onto a horse with a broken leg was not a quiet process. He was game about it. Lily gave him that. He did not complain beyond one sharp, involuntary sound when Cole lifted him, and after that, he set his jaw and held on and directed his own weight with the particular stoicism of a man who understood that the alternative to pain was being left behind, and being left behind was not acceptable. Cole rigged a splint from a straight branch, and 2 strips cut from his own bedroll, bound it tight, and Alden looked at the finished result and said, "Adequate," which Cole seemed to take as sufficient praise. They moved. Lily took the lead now because she was carrying the documents, and Cole needed both hands free to manage Alden's horse on the rough ground. She pushed the pace as hard as she dared, watching the canyon walls on either side, listening behind them for the sound of pursuit that she knew was coming. The hour Cole had estimated was probably optimistic. Dillard was not a smart man in many ways, but he was persistent, the way a bad debt was persistent, and he would figure out the fork eventually. "How far to Mill Haven from this road?" she asked, not looking back. 2 days if the ground holds, Cole said. "Day and a half if we push tonight." "We push tonight," Alden said from behind them through his teeth. "I did not ride 3 days with a broken leg to arrive late." Lily almost smiled. She was beginning to like Frederick Alden in the particular way you begin to like a person under pressure when all the social scaffolding falls away, and you see what they are actually made of. "The documents your father sent me," Alden said, adjusting his grip on the saddle horn. "I've been building a case from them for 2 years. Cross-referencing with county records, federal land office filings, the railroad's right-of-way applications." He paused for a breath that was more controlled than it sounded. "What I didn't have was the bank records. Without those, I had evidence of individual frauds, but not the systematic pattern. A judge can dismiss individual cases as disputes. He cannot dismiss 30 years of coordinated fraud across an entire county. And with the bank records, Lily asked. With those, Alden said, Victor Kane doesn't just lose his property claims. He faces federal charges. Land fraud at this scale involving railroad contracts crosses into federal jurisdiction. My brother has been waiting for that threshold. Cole said from behind her, Kane knows that. Yes, Alden agreed. That's why he's been moving so quickly since your arrival, Mr. Maddox. He recognized that someone was paying attention. And a man like Kane, when he feels cornered, gets dangerous. Lily finished. Gets very dangerous, Alden said. And stops being careful. That was the thing about cornered men, Lily thought. They stopped being careful. And men who stopped being careful made mistakes. And mistakes left traces. And traces to someone who knew how to read a ledger were as legible as words on a page. She pressed forward. They were an hour further north when Cole said, Stop. His voice had a particular quality. Not loud, not alarmed, just different enough from his normal register that Lily pulled up immediately, her hand going to her horse's neck to keep it still. She heard it a moment later. Not hoofbeats behind them. Something ahead, the sound of a single rider coming down the canyon at a controlled pace. Not running, not chasing. Moving deliberately like a man following a route he knew. Cole came up beside Lily Alden's horse on a lead behind him. One rider, he said low. Coming toward us, she confirmed. Doesn't have the sound of Kane's men. They move in groups. Unless they split up at the fork, she said. He considered that. Unless they split up. The rider came around the long curve of the canyon wall, and Lily's hand tightened on her reins, and then released when she saw who it was. Billy Pruitt. On a horse that was better than anything the sheriff's stable usually kept riding, with an urgency that had nothing of the careful boy from Mabel's back gate about it. He saw them, and pulled up hard, and his face had the open, transparent relief of someone who has been afraid of not finding a thing, and has found it. I've been riding since before midnight, he said, breathing hard. I took the main road part way, and then cut across the ridge. I didn't know if I'd catch you. What happened? Cole said. Billy looked at all three of them in turn, and when his eyes reached Frederick Alden, they widened slightly. Recognition, Lily thought, or the recognition of the significance of Alden's presence. Kane knows about Alden, he said. Somebody in Millhaven sent word yesterday that Alden had left for Red Rock Flats. Kane's been intercepting telegraph messages for months. He has a man at the office. He looked at Lily. He knows what your father sent to Millhaven. He knows about the bank records. How? Lily asked. The source inside the bank, Billy said. The one who gave your father the documents. Kane found out. He stopped. Something crossed his face that was close to grief. Miss Hart. It was Heck Granger. Lily felt the name land like a stone dropped in still water. The ripple of it moving outward through everything she had assumed, everything she had built her understanding on. Heck Granger. Old Heck, who had kept his eyes down all night while she hung from the ceiling. Who had poured drinks and said nothing, and whom she had understood, whom she had forgiven because he had a wife and children, and Kane owned their roof. Heck Granger, who had been feeding her father information from inside Kane's bank for how long? How many years had that quiet, unremarkable man been sitting behind his bar and keeping his eyes down and feeding the truth to Thomas Hart, one careful document at a time? Is he? She started. Kane had him brought in this morning, Billy said. He's in the jail. My father's keeping him there, which is the only good thing my father has done in 4 years, and I told him so. He swallowed. He's all right. Kane wants him to recant, to say the documents were altered by your father. But Heck Granger is... Billy almost smiled, a strange, sad smile. Heck Granger is not recanting. Cole looked at Lily. She looked back at him. Something passed between them that did not need words. The recognition that the story was larger than either of them had seen, that ordinary people had been part of it all along, carrying pieces of it in the particular quiet way of people who have no power except patience. "Tell your father," Cole said to Billy, "that when this reaches federal court, Heck Granger's cooperation with Thomas Hart will be part of the record. Tell him that matters." Billy nodded hard. Then, "There's one more thing. It's why I rode through the night." He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper, different from the last one. Official looking with a seal. "This came through the telegraph office 4 hours ago, after Kane's man left. It's addressed to Mr. Alden." He handed it across to the lawyer. Alden took it, unfolded it one-handed, with the careful economy of his broken arm situation. "Read it." His expression did not change, but something in his posture did a settling, a solidifying, like a man who has just had a long calculation confirmed. "My brother," he said. "Judge Alden has moved the court date up. He received a preliminary filing from the Federal Land Office 3 days ago. Someone had already been investigating Kane's railroad contracts independently. The court convenes in 4 days. 4 days. Lily did the arithmetic without thinking about it. 2 days to Millhaven if they rode hard. 1 day for Alden to prepare the documentation. 1 day for Lily to go over the bank records with him and organize her testimony. 4 days. Exactly 4. "Kane has a federal warrant out for Cole," she said. "If he can get Cole arrested before we reach Millhaven." "He can delay the proceedings," Alden said. "Yes, that's likely the strategy." He looked at Cole. "How much does that concern you?" Cole was quiet for a moment. "Concern's not the right word," he said. "I've dealt with manufactured warrants before. Once we're in front of Judge Alden with the documentation, the warrant goes away. The question is whether we get there." "Then we get there," Lily said. She looked at Billy. "Go home. You've done enough. More than enough." Billy straightened in his saddle. He was young. She thought so young, with the particular courage of someone who has not yet learned to be strategic about bravery, who simply does the right thing because the alternative has not occurred to him as a genuine option. Her father would have liked him. "Miss Hart," Billy said, "tell them about my father, when you get there. Tell them he was scared. That's different from being bad." "I'll tell them," she said. He turned his horse and rode back south, and Lily watched him go until the canyon curve took him, and then she turned forward again. They rode through the afternoon and into the evening, and when dark made the canyon road too uncertain, Cole found a shallow overhang in the rock wall and they stopped. No fire. Cold food and colder air, and Alden propped his leg on his saddlebag and went through his copies of the documents by touch in the dark, organizing them by some internal filing system that he explained as he went. And Lily listened and asked questions and began to understand the full architecture of what her father had built. It was enormous. That was the only word for it. 30 years of careful, systematic theft, land and money and labor extracted from 17 families through manufactured debt, through forged documents, through the steady corruption of every official mechanism that should have stopped it. Sheriff Pruitt, the local judge, the bank, the telegraph office. Kane had not built a criminal enterprise. He had built a system. He had taken the legitimate structures of a frontier town and hollowed them out and filled them with himself, and the result looked from the outside like law and order. Lily sat with the ledger open across her knees in the dark, not reading it. She had it memorized now virtually, and she thought about her father sitting in his store at night doing exactly this, building the counter record, the true account. "He never told me," she said, not particularly to anyone. Alden's voice came from the dark beside her. "He told me he didn't want to put you in danger until the documentation was complete, and then he got sick faster than he expected." A pause. "He said when he wrote to me the last time, 3 weeks before he died, he said his daughter was the best accountant he had ever known, and that she would understand the ledger without him having to explain it." Another pause. He was not wrong. Lily pressed her hand flat against the ledger page in the dark. "No," she said. "He wasn't." She felt Cole settle nearby, not close, but close enough that she was aware of him, the particular steady warmth of his presence in the cold of the overhang. He had been quieter than usual since Billy's information about Heck Granger, and she had noticed without commenting, And now she said quietly enough that Alden would not necessarily hear, "Are you all right?" He was quiet for a moment. "Heck, Granger," he said finally. "Man like that sitting in that bar every night keeping his head down, and the whole time he's carrying that. Feeding Thomas Hart information. Knowing what Kane would do to him if he found out." "Yes," Lily said. "That kind of courage doesn't have a name," Cole said. "The kind that nobody sees. That doesn't look like anything from the outside." "My father had a name for it," Lily said. "He called it faithfulness." She paused. "He said it was the rarest thing he knew." Cole was quiet. Then, "Your father sounds like a man worth knowing." "He was," Lily said. "You would have—" She stopped, restarted. "He would have liked you." Another long quiet, and then Cole said with a roughness in his voice that he did not try to smooth, "I'm glad you said that." They took turns keeping watch through the night, 2 hours on and 2 hours off. And when Lily's watch came, she sat at the edge of the overhang and listened to the canyon and thought about faithfulness and what it cost and what it was worth and did not feel afraid. They were moving again before first light. The second day's riding was harder. The canyon road climbed steeply in the first hours, and Alden's leg had stiffened overnight, and the pain had moved from manageable to something larger that he handled by talking, which Lily suspected he did not normally do, and which she found, under the circumstances, entirely forgivable. He talked about the law, about the specific statutes they would be invoking, about the question of whether the land deed in Lily's name could be used not only to establish her ownership of the North Creek property, but to invalidate all of Kane's subsequent filings, since the entire legal fiction of her indebtedness rested on documents that were demonstrably forged. "The deed predates the alleged debt by 7 years, Lily said, working through it as she rode. "If the deed is valid, and it was registered properly, then the debt instrument has no legitimate claim on the land, regardless of whether my father signed it. The land was already removed from the estate." "Correct," Alden said. "And more than that, it suggests that Kane knew the land existed and was titled in your name and constructed the debt specifically to circumvent that title. That's not just fraud. That's conspiracy to commit fraud with the land office filings as the instrument. And the bank records show the financial trail," Lily said. "The payments to Pruitt, the payments to the judge. If we can show that officials were compensated to ignore the fraud, then we have a conspiracy charge with named co-conspirators," Alden said. "Which means Kane does not go to prison on 1 count. He goes on 30. Cole, who had been listening without speaking, said from behind them, "Riders, south, 3 of them, moving fast." The change in the air was immediate. Alden stopped talking. Lily's hands tightened on the reins. "How far?" she asked. 20 minutes, maybe less." "Can we outrun them to the Millhaven Road junction?" Not with Alden's horse, Lily thought. Fast the way her father had taught her to think. Identify the problem, identify the variables, identify the only move that works. "Is there a position higher up?" she asked, "where one man with a rifle could hold a narrow point, while 2 riders go ahead?" Cole looked at the canyon wall to their left. She watched him read it the way she read a ledger, quickly, precisely looking for the relevant information. "Yes," he said. "About a quarter mile ahead. There's a choke point where the walls come in. 1 man holds it, 2 riders get 20 minutes clear." "Then that's what we do," she said. "Lily, you're the one with the rifle and the experience," she said. "Alden and I go ahead. You hold the point. 20 minutes and then you ride." She met his eyes. "Don't make it heroic. Just make it 20 minutes. He looked at her for a long moment. The assessment in it, not of whether she was right. She could see that he knew she was right, but of something else, something that had nothing to do with tactics. Then he said, 20 minutes. The Millhaven Road junction is 3 miles past the choke point. There's a way station. Wait for me there." "We'll be there," she said. They rode hard to the choke point. Cole pulled up, swung down, tied his horse in a crack in the rock wall where it was invisible from below, and looked at Lily one more time. She had already moved forward, Alden's horse on the lead beside her, and she did not let herself stop because stopping would cost something she could not afford to spend right now. "Maddox," she called back without turning. "Hart," he said. 20 minutes, she said. "Not 21. She heard behind her, unmistakably, a sound she had never heard from him before. Not quite a laugh. Something adjacent to it. Something that came from a place he did not usually let things come from. She rode. She rode with Alden beside her, with the documents against her ribs, and her father's careful handwriting in her memory, and the deed to 37 acres filed in her name, and she listened behind her for gunshots, and heard one, and then silence, and then two more, at distance, and then silence again. And she did not slow down. The way station appeared at the junction of the Millhaven Road, exactly where Cole had said it would be. She helped Alden down, and he sat against the wall with his leg out and his leather case on his knees, and did not complain, and she stood at the edge of the road and watched north for hoofbeats. 15 minutes. She counted them. 16. 17. And then at 19 minutes, by her own counting, a single horse came around the canyon bend at a controlled canter, not running, not pursued, just moving with the economy of a man who has done what needed doing, and is coming back exactly when he said he would. Cole pulled up beside her. There was dust on his hat, and a cut on his right hand that was still bleeding, and he looked entirely profoundly calm. 20 minutes, she said. 19, he corrected. I was early. She looked at his hand. You're bleeding. Rock chip, he said. It's nothing. He swung down and looked at both of them, at Alden, at Lily, at the documents she was holding. Everyone intact. Intact, Alden said from the wall with remarkable composure. Good. Cole looked at the Millhaven Road stretching north. One more day. Lily Hart stood at the junction of the Canyon Road and the Millhaven Road with her father's life's work under her arm, and a man beside her who had taken a rock chip to the hand and called it nothing, and she thought about all the things she had not been allowed to be for the last 14 months, not free, not safe, not certain of anything past the next day's survival, and she thought about what waited at the end of one more day's riding. Not safety, not yet, not exactly, but something close to its beginning. One more day, she said. And they rode north. Millhaven was nothing like Red Rock Flats. That was the first thing Lily noticed when they rode in on the morning of the fourth day. The particular quality of a town that had not been hollowed out. People moved on the street with the unhurried confidence of people who did not spend energy calculating who was watching them. The buildings had the solid, maintained look of structures owned by the people who used them. It was not a rich town or a beautiful town, but it was a free one, and Lily felt the difference in her chest before she could name it. Frederick Alden had ridden the last 6 hours on stubbornness alone. His color was bad, and his jaw had been set since before dawn. But when they helped him down outside the territorial courthouse, he straightened himself to his full height, adjusted his leather case, and walked through the front door under his own power. Lily and Cole followed him. The courthouse clerk took one look at Alden's leg, at the documents he placed on the counter, and at the expressions on all three of their faces, and went to find Judge Elias Alden without being asked twice. Judge Alden was a taller, older version of his brother. The same precise eyes, the same quality of compressed attention, but carrying the particular weight of a man who had spent decades watching the law be used as both instrument and weapon, and had never stopped believing it could be the former. He came out of his chambers, took in his brother's leg, took in Lily, took in Cole, and said, "How bad is it?" "The leg or the case," Frederick said. "Both." "The leg will heal," Frederick said. "The case is 30 years of fraud documented down to the last dollar. And it has to be heard in 4 days, or Kane's network will find a way to bury it again." Judge Alden looked at the documents his brother placed in his hands. He was quiet for a long time, turning pages, and the silence in that courthouse hallway had the particular texture of a moment that knows it is important. "Get my brother to a doctor," the judge said finally to the clerk, then to Lily. "Miss Hart, I'd like you to walk me through this ledger." They spent the rest of the day and most of the night in the judge's chambers. Lily had imagined this moment differently. She had imagined being nervous or uncertain, or overwhelmed by the formality of it. Instead, she sat across from Judge Elias Alden, with her father's ledger open between them, and found that she was entirely precisely calm. The way she was calm when numbers were in front of her, when the task was to read them honestly and explain what they said. This was what she had been trained for without knowing it was training. This was what all those evenings in the store running figures at her father's elbow had been building toward. She walked him through it from the beginning. The original promissory note, the ledger entries showing its repayment, the forged secondary lien with Gerald Cook's dead man's signature, the land deed in her name predating the alleged debt by 7 years, the bank records, 30 years of them systematic and damning, showing payment after payment to Pruitt, to the local judge, to the railroad men who had looked the other way. Judge Alden asked precise questions, and she gave precise answers, and Cole sat in the corner of the room and said nothing. And was she thought exactly the right person to have in a room where someone needed to be steady without being noticed? At 2 in the morning, Judge Alden set down his pen and looked at her across the table. "Your father," he said, "was an extraordinary man." "I know," Lily said. "And you," he said, "are your father's daughter." She held that. "Is it enough?" she asked. "The documentation, is it enough?" "Miss Hart," he said, "it is more than enough. It is the most complete record of systematic county fraud I have seen in 30 years on the bench." He closed the ledger carefully with the respect you give to something that cost a great deal to produce. Victor Kane is going to face federal charges. His co-conspirators, and there are many of them, will face the same. The question is not whether it is enough. The question is whether you are prepared for what comes next. "What comes next?" she asked. "A public hearing," he said. "In this courthouse, with Kane present and his lawyers present and every man whose name appears in those records sitting in that room." He looked at her steadily. "You will need to testify, in your own words, in your own voice, about the debt, about the forgery, about the land, about what they did to you." A pause. "It will not be comfortable." Lily thought about a ceiling beam in the Red Canyon Saloon, about 14 months of smallness and silence and survival, about her father at his counter in the evenings, building the true record, 1 page at a time. "Schedule it," she said. The hearing was set for 2 days later. In those 2 days, Millhaven moved around them with the quiet efficiency of a machine that had been waiting for the right material. Judge Alden's clerk sent telegraphs to the Federal Land Office, to the Territorial Marshal's Office, to 3 separate federal prosecutors who had apparently had Victor Kane's name on their lists for years, without the documentation to act. Cole went with the Territorial Marshal's deputy to file a formal response to the manufactured warrant, which was reviewed, found to rest on forged affidavits, and dismissed in an afternoon. Frederick Alden's leg was set properly by a doctor who told him he should not have ridden on it for 2 days, and Alden said he was aware of that, thank you, and could he have his documents back now? Lily slept. For the first time in longer than she could accurately calculate, she slept through an entire night without listening for footsteps, without cataloging which direction was out, without the specific vigilance of someone who has learned that safety is temporary. She woke in the morning with the particular disorientation of a person whose body has remembered something their mind had begun to forget, and she lay still for a moment and simply breathed and let herself feel the unfamiliar solidity of it. On the morning of the hearing, she dressed carefully. Mabel Greer had packed a dark blue dress in the bag that Cole had brought out of the boarding house on their way through, and Lily had not known it was there until the night before, had found it folded at the bottom, with a note in Mabel's handwriting that said, "Only for when you need to look like yourself." She put it on and pinned her hair up the way her mother had taught her, and looked at herself in the small mirror above the wash basin, and thought, "This is what Thomas Hart's daughter looks like when she is not afraid." Cole was waiting in the hall when she came out. He looked at her, and something moved through his face. That was not the almost smile, it was quieter than that, and more. "Ready," he said. "Yes," she said. They walked to the courthouse together. The courtroom was full. Word had moved through Mill Haven the way word moved through any small western town, fast and thorough. And the room held not only the officials and the lawyers, but ordinary people, ranchers and shopkeepers, and a woman near the back who Lily did not recognize, but who was watching with the specific intent of someone who has a personal stake in the outcome. She would find out later that the woman's family was one of the 17. Victor Kane was already seated at the defendant's table when Lily walked in. She had steeled herself for this, for the particular experience of seeing him in a room where he did not own the walls or the floor or the man at the front of it. But the reality of it was still something she had to breathe through. He was the same as he had always been, silver-haired, precisely dressed, with those flat, colorless eyes, moving across the room and arriving at her with the assessment of a man who had not yet accepted that the calculation had changed. He looked at her for a long moment. And then he looked at Cole standing at her shoulder, and for just a fraction of a second, something behind those flat eyes shifted. Not fear exactly, but the thing that precedes it, in a man who has not felt it in a long time. Lily sat at the witness table, placed her father's ledger in front of her, folded her hands on top of it. Judge Elias Alden entered and the room stood. "Be seated," he said. And they were. What followed was 3 hours that Lily would carry with her for the rest of her life, not because they were dramatic in the way of the canyon and the rope and the riding, but because they were exact. Precision was its own kind of power. She had always known that, but she had never felt it so clearly as she did sitting in that chair, reading her father's figures aloud into a silent room, explaining the pressure changes in the handwriting, tracing the specific sequence of transactions that proved not just individual fraud, but systematic coordinated theft conducted across 3 decades. Kane's lawyer objected, multiple times, with the increasingly strained energy of a man working against rising water. Judge Alden sustained some and overruled most, and when Kane's lawyer suggested that the documents might themselves be fraudulent, that Thomas Hart might have fabricated records to slander his client, Judge Alden looked at him with the measured patience of a man who has heard this argument before and finds it no more interesting the second time. "The dead man's signature," Judge Alden said, "which appears on the alleged lien instrument. Mr. Gerald Cook, who died of cholera in Laramie in April of 1865. You are suggesting that Thomas Hart forged a witness signature onto a document your client is simultaneously claiming your client's bank generated legitimately using the name of a man who died 9 years ago." The lawyer said nothing. "I will note for the record," Judge Alden said, "that the simplest explanation remains the most credible one." Kane sat very still throughout. This was, Lily realized, the most frightening version of him, not the version that gave orders and lifted 2 fingers from a glass. This version, the version that was calculating even now whether there was a move left. When Lily finished her testimony, the federal prosecutor stood and walked through the bank records point by point, named the officials who had received payments, named the transactions, named the amounts. It was not dramatic. It was devastating, the way that honest arithmetic is devastating, not because it shouts, but because it cannot be argued with. The deed to the North Creek property was entered into evidence. The land office confirmed its registration. The railroad representative, who had been sitting in the 3rd row with the look of a man attending his own accountability, shifted in his seat and then stood and said quietly that the railroad wished to make a statement regarding the contract negotiations for the North Spur right-of-way. Everyone in the room turned to look at him. The railroad, he said, had been told by Kane that the North Creek land was acquired legally and without encumbrance. If it had come to their attention that the land was titled to a private individual, a Miss Lily Hart of Red Rock Flats, they would have been required to negotiate directly with that individual, as per federal land usage statute. They had not been told this. They wished the record to reflect that they had not been told. Lily sat very still and let the shape of it complete itself in the room. Kane had built everything on one premise: that she would not know what she owned. That a 19-year-old girl alone in a frontier town with a rope around her wrists and no one to help her would not know that she was sitting on land worth 10 times everything Kane had manufactured against her. That she would accept what she was told because she had no means to know otherwise. He had miscalculated one thing. Her father. Judge Alden called a recess of 20 minutes. When he returned, he was carrying a document that the clerk had prepared and which he read into the record with the careful, measured authority of a man who has been waiting a long time to say what he is about to say. Victor Kane was remanded to federal custody on charges of land fraud conspiracy to defraud bribery of public officials and conspiracy to interfere with federal land registration. His assets in Red Rock Flats, the saloon, the mill, the cattle operations, the bank interest were frozen pending federal review. All fraudulent liens and debt instruments connected to his operations were voided. The 17 families named in Thomas Hart's records were to be notified and their cases individually reviewed. The room was very quiet when the judge finished reading. And then it was not quiet. Lily sat at the witness table and did not move while the room reorganized itself around the fact of what had just happened. She heard Kane's voice once, a single sharp sentence to his lawyer that she did not catch, and then the sound of the bailiff, and then silence from that direction. She did not look. She did not need to. After a while, Cole sat down in the chair beside her. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to either. Outside the courthouse windows, Mill Haven was going about its afternoon horses on the street, someone calling to someone else across the way, the ordinary sounds of a place that had never stopped trusting its own daily life. Lily listened to it and felt something in her chest complete itself, like the last figure entered in a long column of numbers, the moment when the ledger balances and you set down the pen. "What happens to Red Rock Flats now?" she asked. "It rebuilds," Cole said. "Slowly. Towns do when you take the weight off them." She thought about Mabel Greer's back gate and the good lock on the doors, about Billy Pruitt riding through the night with information he did not have to bring, about Heck Granger behind his bar keeping his eyes down and feeding the truth forward night after night for years with no certainty that it would ever matter. It had mattered. "Frederick wants to set up a permanent legal review office," Cole said, "for fraud cases in the territory. He said he needs someone who can read a ledger and spot a forged document by the pressure of the pen." A pause. "He said he already knows who he's asking." Lily looked at the ledger under her hands, at her father's handwriting, at the columns of figures that had traveled from a hardware store counter to a false bottom to a territorial courthouse and changed everything they touched along the way. "I know," she said. She looked at Cole, then fully the way she had been careful not to do too often, because looking at him fully was something that required not courage, exactly, but intention. He looked back at her with those dark, steady eyes that had found her in a smoke-filled room and registered a fact and decided what to do about it. And she thought about what he had said in the canyon. "I don't like what happens to a place where that stops meaning anything." And she thought about all the different kinds of faithfulness there were in the world. Her father's faithfulness, and Heck Granger's and Mabel's, and the particular faithfulness of a man who walks into a room full of violence and says, "Let her down," without raising his voice. "Are you going to stay?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. Outside, a horse went by on the street. "I reckon," he said, "that depends on whether there's something worth staying for." Lily Hart looked at Cole Maddox in the afternoon light of the Mill Haven courthouse, with her father's ledger under her hands, and 30 years of her county's history rewritten behind her, and she said, "There is." And that was the truth. The simple, unembellished, fully documented truth, the kind that does not require a witness signature, the kind that cannot be forged, the kind that once spoken aloud in an honest room cannot be taken back. Thomas Hart's daughter had paid his debt in full, and she was just getting started.